we talk about the virtue of patience. He uses that English word very deliberately to say that we are docile people. Being docile in the context in which he speaks is not positive. Today you look at Africa, and I'm aware of Africa Agenda 2063, in respect of which the church has written a beautiful document about how the religious fraternity will engage with African governments in order to achieve a middle-level economy for Africa. And I remember on that day, it was in 2013, on the occasion of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity, now termed the African Union, the chairman of the council, Kosan Dlamini Zuma, gave a speech and delivered an imaginary letter written to her friend Kwame, in which she says, among other things, that if Africa had lost the last 50 years, she will not lose the next 50 years. And she describes in great detail how by that time there will be a railway line from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dakar in Senegal, how the Democratic Republic of Congo will be the hub of technology, and many other positive things. And there is no shortage of people who have dreamed about that Africa. But let us look at the Africa that we have today and ask ourselves whether that Africa does point to those possibilities. There may be some of you here from South Africa, that land that was long victimized by apartheid. Today, when you look at South Africa, which remains Africa's most industrialized economy and the largest economy in Africa, and ask yourself whether the fortunes of that country will be the way they are in the next 50 years. Those of you who come from South Africa can answer the question. Will the mines continue to generate the minerals that they do? Will they support a rising population? Will South Africa be the South Africa that it is today and better? Those of you who are from South Africa will answer that question. Because already one can see the restlessness of the younger population with EFC, or is it EFF, of Julius Malema. Will that restlessness create an environment where they'll become 50 years from today? You South Africans have a better answer for that, even as we sit here. Or there is something that we should worry about. Is there a possibility that the land problems in South Africa will acquire a different perspective and there'll be no peace and rest in that land? Is there that possibility? I give no answers. I leave it to the South Africans who are present in this assembly. Ask that question as you look at your own country. Those who are in the neighborhood in Zimbabwe, a country that was inherited nearly 30 years ago from the regime of Ian Smith. It cannot be denied that at the time of inheriting that country, it had a working economy. The land policy notwithstanding, and the unfairness of it notwithstanding. Today, as I speak to you, Zimbabwe has 90% unemployment. Our young men and women cannot find jobs. Zimbabwe has no currency. They are just about to print something that they will call a currency equated to the United States dollar. Zimbabwe has more than 5 million of our inhabitants outside of Zimbabwe. The question is, and yet again I do not give any answers. You've asked me to talk about the challenges and the possibilities, and we'll talk about them. But look at Zimbabwe today, holding all factors constant. Will Zimbabwe be restored to her status as it was in 1985 in your lifetime? And talk about the patience of the negative kind on the part of African. They have had leaders who have long squandered their historical dividends and credits. But yet they have no shortage of supporters from an ethnic perspective. Lives have been destroyed. Those of you who are from Zimbabwe, is it possible that in your lifetime, young men and women who are present here and your children's and children's children will rebuild that economy? In my younger days at the university, when we wanted good cotton shirts to be bought for us, we sent people to Harare. That is no more there. Those of you who are in Swaziland, in the neighborhood, the only thing that we know about them is that they have the annual reed dance. It's a feudal economy. But the unemployment level in that land is in the neighborhood of 60%. With HIV/AIDS ravaging in that land, are there possibilities and opportunities for young men and women there? And those of you who are in Lesotho, the land of the proud Basotho, are there opportunities there? We talk about challenges, and we sometimes talk about Africa as if it were one homogeneous. Remember that Africa has no less than 3,000 languages. Go to Namibia, that quiet land of the Herero and the Ovambo. The problem of land is beginning to rear its ugly head there. The question is, beyond the fishing in the Walvis Bay and the minerals there, will there be opportunities for young men and women so that Africa may rise? The question is there. You are Christians. We may pray all we want. But prayer without action is superstition, let me tell you, and I'm not blasphemous. You move a little bit to Angola, that land that has oil and gas. Angola, Luanda is one of the world's most expensive cities. The oil prices have gone down. Inflation has risen in Angola. If you want to rent a house in Angola, you pay rent 1 year in advance. Are there opportunities for young men and women in that land? If you move a little bit to the armpit of Africa in Equatorial Guinea, long held by the Nguema family, oil is in abundance there, but there is there an opportunity for young men and women. Are there possibilities for those whom we are churning out of our universities? Are there opportunities? These are questions that I pose to you. You move to Malawi, which for a short time during the period of Mbingu wa Mutharika managed to solve the problem of food insecurity. They have now gone back where they came from. They have had almost total crop failure this year. Are there opportunities with massive unemployment in the neighborhood of 30 to 40%? And in Zambia, where they have had an election where the results have generated animosity Is the environment there? If the Chichewa are rising against the Bemba because they did not elect one of their own, even in that Zambia, which was peaceful during the days of Kenneth David Kaunda. I'm going through this survey that you may have a clear picture of what Africa is. And you move from Zambia, go to Tanzania, which is emerging as just about one of the few exceptions. In the last 1 year, it is the country that is projected to have an economic growth of 7%. Perhaps Tanzania is on a trajectory that is worth looking at very, very keenly. You come to our own Kenya, where every mobilization is from an ethnic perspective. Only last week, 2 governors moved into a university to demand that one from their ethnicity be appointed as an acting vice chancellor. Even in academics, the qualification no longer how good you are as an academic, but your ethnic extraction. Today they have been summoned by the Minister for Internal Security, and that will make them ethnic heroes. Once they come from Nairobi, I have no doubt in my mind, in a typical Kenyan sense, there'll be a homecoming for them. If you look at that country and we continue on that trajectory, is there not a possibility that in 10 years from today, even if you are from the Kamba tribe, they want you to go to university in your Kamba land? Is that the Africa you want to build? Is that the Africa that has possibilities and opportunities? If a university professor, you are talking about opportunities and possibilities. If a university professor is being told you can never rise to the position of a vice chancellor if you don't come from a particular ethnicity, is that the Africa you are talking about that has opportunities and challenges? If they say that of a professor, what of a cleaner? What of a carpenter? What of other jobs that do not even require? Even in church, and I've said this many times today, if you are to be appointed a bishop in many churches, they first ask whether you come from the ethnic community. As if God could not listen to a bishop who is a Kikuyu when he's serving in Luola. Even in church, even the church is not exempt. And you move a little to Somalia, that land is not at ease. You move to Ethiopia, the Oromia are already beginning to rise. And why are they rising? They are saying, we do not want to be governed by the Tigrinya. Even in Ethiopia, which was beginning to grow in the right direction, negative ethnicity is beginning to take root. And in Eritrea, which we almost forget, the economy stopped growing a long time ago. If you move to the Democratic Republic of Congo, that land, which is the wealthiest land on the continent of Africa, and yet one of the poorest, the country is not at ease. And you move to South Sudan, the Nuer and the Dinka have risen, and that country, which is no more than 4 years old, if you go to Juba, there is no economic activity at all. Unemployment is possibly in the neighborhood of 80%. Oil production has reduced by almost 70% since the war. Part of the governance system, the governors who are governing in Juba have gone back to Khartoum and are issuing statements from Khartoum. You go to Central African Republic, the religious war between the Christians and the Muslims is alive and well. You go to Niger, it's the same. You go to Burkina Faso, you remember only recently they expelled their president. You go to Cote d'Ivoire. You go to Gabon, there is a problem. Those of you who come from Togo, that land of Sylvanus of Olympio, people never remember that the first country to lose their president in a coup d'etat was Togo. When in 1960, Sylvanus Olympio was overthrown. Whether you talk of Togo, you talk of Benin, you talk of Guinea-Conakry, you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you go to Gabon, you go to Mali, you go to Mauritania, most French West Africans think and aspire to be Frenchmen. There is no middle-class African from a former French colony who does not want to own an apartment in Paris. The colonial project was a success. Because if it was a question of controlling the mind is controlled. If they take their children to school, they look to taking them to the university at Paris or the Sorbonne. You can talk about the Maghreb, the Algerias, the Libyas, the Egypts, and all other countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia. That is the state of Africa. I wanted us to walk through this continent before we ask the question, are there challenges? Challenges are numerous. But there are possibilities. But it depends on the choices we make as a people. Many times when you go to African countries and forums of political nature, not of course as I was talking, I did not talk about Uganda and I did not talk about Rwanda, another country which in my view, if it does a few things right, could be in the right direction. Burundi, we know what is happening there. Nigeria, we know what is happening. The Igbo now want their own little country. The question is, in the next 50 years, will we have one Nigeria? Ghana, which was doing very well until the oil prices started going down. In other words, the question that we are asking, having had that survey of Africa, is what are the opportunities and what are the possibilities? And you who are present here, who are the younger generation, do you represent a future that we should be confident about? Because the strength of any society is the strength and the resolve of our youth, of our young men and women. You are the generation that will succeed, the generation that precedes you. But are you prepared? Sometimes I fear you are not. In fact, many times I fear you are not. And why do I say that you are not? Because of the absence of opportunities. Many young Africans actually want to leave the continent. On Thursday, in the morning, for the first time, I visited the Cape Coast Castle, which Bright would know about in Ghana. And I saw the dungeons where slaves, divided into men and women, were taken out of this continent. And saw the door of no return, which through once you'd passed, you'd say goodbye to the continent of Africa, and half of those who left died. And the previous day I was at the castle at Elmina, which was also another slave point. And I asked myself that when these people were leaving the continent, they were a resource. The African had been commodified. Slavery was a process of commodification. You are branded as you did cattle to go and work the fields in the Caribbean and in the Americas and in Europe. When the agrarian revolution gave way to the industrial revolution and slavery lost its luster, a new dispensation came. The song whose first stanza we have just sung, Amazing Grace, is a composition of Isaac Newton, I believe, who was one of the major slave traders, and got a revelation, and he talked about how amazing God's grace is, that even he could be saved. Whether he was saved or not is another debate, but he composed the song. But the reality is, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, slavery was no longer useful because machines had now been discovered that would do the work that Africans were doing. And how I always think that in fact slavery never quite lost its, it became useless as an enterprise, slavery, and that is why they now came to colonize. Remember that colonization is the immediate successor of slavery. So it now became necessary to come and exploit the resources of Africa. So Africa and Africans have always been attractive. I heard my good friend Pastor Wanda say that perhaps Africa is, the 21st century is Africa's century. And you always see something that Africa is rising. But I say, for whom is Africa rising? Africa has always risen. But for whom does it rise? It doesn't rise for Africans. It rises for others. Today, Africa is rising for the Chinese. If you go to many universities in Africa, the Chinese have graciously donated to us something called the Confucius Center. And many a young African is no longer studying French or English as the second language. We want to learn Mandarin. Holding all factors constant, I believe that a good number of African graduates will be fluent in Chinese, of the Mandarin dialect. And the pastors who are here, I will not be surprised, like we have always done over the ages, even at baptismals. We will have our young children being baptized as Deng Xiaoping. Sometimes we say these things half in seriousness, sometimes in jest. But this is a tragedy of major proportions. Remember, we are talking about challenges and opportunities. The opportunities will always be there, and have always been there for those who seek them in earnest. You know, when I look at the education systems that we have had and have inherited over the years, and I talk about opportunities and challenges today in Kenya, perhaps we have over 70 universities. And I look at our agriculture sector. We describe in many African countries that agriculture is the backbone of our economies. What a weak backbone we have. Africa cannot feed ourselves. The West Africans who are lovers of jollof rice, half of the jollof rice is imported. They can't even produce enough jollof rice, but they love it. And I'm sure there is no shortage of universities which are graduating. Universities graduating young people in agriculture. The South Africans, the West Africans who love powdered milk cannot even produce milk. They get their powdered milk from Nestle in Switzerland. Talk of opportunities and squandering of opportunities. Still in West Africa, they love tomatoes. and pepper soup and associated soups. But the chilies they consume, holding all factors constant, will be from Heinz in the United States of America. You come to West Africa, to East Africa here, we have some milk, but you still find Parmalat milk. Here, chocolate, which we would have imported from Cote d'Ivoire, leaves Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in their raw form to Nestle, and then we come here and consume them as Cadbury chocolate from the United Kingdom. And the middle class are not complete without Cadbury chocolate. Talk of exporting jobs. Ali Mazrui was right. Africa consumes that which it does not produce and produces that which it does not consume. This is the only continent that we talk about second-hand clothing as if it was something very useful. What Europe and America have discarded, we wear. You go to markets in West Africa, whether it's in Benin or in Cotonou or in Togo Lome or in Takoradi Sekondi in Ghana or in Nairobi, Kenya or Dar es Salaam, Tanzania or Rwanda, Kigali or Bujumbura, you find our men and women wearing clothes discarded by other civilizations, including underwear. And then we wonder how our textile industries have collapsed. We talk about losing jobs. I'm still faithful to the subject of opportunities and challenges. So the question is, knowing as we do what the situation is, what can we do and what must we do? Because there are challenges in the manner that I have talked about. Liberia's Johnson Sirleaf says that Africa is not poor, but Africa is poorly managed. And that is the truth. Africa is poorly managed at all levels. And Africans have a very low threshold of satisfaction. We celebrate that which we need not celebrate. We celebrate mediocrity. Now, I've said at another forum that when you hear African economies talking about which is the biggest economy in Africa, that is not a useful debate. It is a debate of the pygmies asking who is taller than the other. One may be an inch taller than the other, but at the end of the day, they are still dwarfs. And I say this in all cities. In East Africa, Kenya says we are the largest economy in East Africa. But what economy are you talking about? $55 billion. With the Tanzanian following possibly at $45 billion and the Ugandan possibly at $35 billion and the Rwandese possibly at about $20 to $30 billion and the Burundian, which is a contracting economy, at $2 billion. The combined economy of East Africa is smaller than the economy of Washington, D.C. with a population of no more than 900,000 people, and our population is 150 million. That is what we are talking about. And why is that important? Because it is that economy that is going to offer you the opportunities and the possibilities. Is the economy expanding? Are we expanding the economy? Is the expansion of the economy contaminous with the population growth? These are the critical issues that we must survey as Africans. And unfortunately, Africans never want to engage in these conversations. There's a book which I commend to you, written by a white South African called Greg Mills, Why Africa is Poor and What They Can Do About It. And in the book he says, among other things, that poverty is now optional. People can make a choice to be poor. And he says that the reason why Africans are poor is because their leaders have chosen that path, and the people have also agreed to follow them in that path. And I agree that that indeed is the reason. If you look at all sectors, I've talked about the sector of agriculture and about our production of young men and women. Today, if you look at Africa and ask yourself the question, who produces our seeds just for purposes of planting? Is there a major pan-African organization that produces seeds for planting? No. Our seeds and our universities and our research foundation are supported by Monsanto from the United States and Syngenta. And today, you know that Monsanto and Bayer of Germany have united to form one major company whose name has not been chosen. Who produces that? So that if you can't produce your own food, how can you have food security? Is there any meaningful research that is going on in that area to produce and generate jobs? Because that is a mega industry. Are the universities of science and technology and agriculture in Africa engaged in that kind of scientific research so that we can produce a pan-African institution that focuses on the production of seed in the area of wheat, in barley, in corn and other areas? Are we engaged in that way so that we can generate jobs in the agricultural sector? No, we are not. There are opportunities and challenges in that area. In the area of mobile telephony, we talk about mobile telephone penetration in Africa. In Kenya is almost 95%. We possibly have nearly 500 million mobile phone gadgets in Africa. Is there a single African country that makes a single mobile phone? Not one. All of us here have some mobile phone. Tell me who among you here has a mobile phone made by an African country? None. None. South Korea, with whom we were at par in the 1950s, I'm sure half of the phones here are Samsung, even if we exclude Samsung 7, which has now been withdrawn in certain quarters. None. That is an area of opportunity, but Africans are resting on their laurels. They are marveling about the phone they have from South Korea. China is now producing. Those of you who cannot afford South Korean phone, China is generous with their tech. If you can't buy that, you buy the iPhone. And yet, the most important ingredient used in the phone is found in only 2 places in abundance. In China itself and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which produces and has the largest deposit of rare earth. The Democratic Republic of Congo. So, when you buy a phone, equipment such as this, a mobile phone, you are creating jobs in South Korea. When you buy techno, you are creating jobs in China. You are losing opportunities. We now have water. This one is produced here. But in many other forums, you'll have water called Dasani, Coca-Cola. Even water now, they have to come from Atlanta, Georgia to package for us water to drink. For each one of these, you produce outside. If you go into the textile industry that I've talked about, all of us are in a state of some dress. And I can assure you that 3/4 of the things that you wear, none of them are made in Africa, including our gracious ladies who may have human hair. The human hair will have been imported from India. It is the most preferred human hair. And how many of us actually know that the hair industry is a multi-billion industry? Africans, the hair debate is alive and well in South Africa, where the kinky hair is hair that is worth being celebrated. The beauty products that our women consume, how many of our countries are engaged in that? Is either L'Oreal from France or some other country? In other words, all these opportunities, and one can go on and on, and I'll not go on and on because I know you have another program. What one is saying, everything we do, Africa is exporting. So where will you work? If you go into the area of engineering, and I keep on talking about, we have very many engineers that we have generated, but if you go to many African countries, as I speak, stadia construction, road construction, you'll find some Chinese. And I don't blame them. The Chinese know what they want and they are working at it. Africans, I do not know whether we know what we want, but we are not working at it. I was looking at a Fante saying, the Fante of the Ghana, that what use is the wind to a sailor who does not know the direction that he seeks? There is the wind of opportunity and wind of possibility in the sea of opportunities, but do the Africans know where they want to go? All the headwind of mediocrity and self-doubt stands in our way. So you are here. This is a conversation that we'll engage in for a long time. And the beauty of this particular one is that we are Africans talking to each other. Many times I see an Africans go to forests where their capacity is being built. This thing called capacity building. And you'll find that some NGO from some European or some place has put Africans together in a building, in a forum, and said, we are building your capacity. For whom are they building your capacity? In what direction are they building your capacity? For whose benefit is your capacity being built? Next time you are invited to a capacity building workshop, ask, for whom is my capacity being built? For whose benefit is my capacity being built? And in what direction is my capacity being built? And what is this capacity that you are building? Ask those critical questions. Don't just attend it so that you may lengthen your curriculum vitae. It is important that we begin to ask these critical questions going forward. And my joy is that this is an assembly of young Africans. And I want to conclude by saying a number of things. Africa still remains, unfortunately, the only continent which is referred to in what I consider to be derogatory terms. Even Africans use these terms. You find the French-speaking West African countries, the Francophone. That is how we are divided. But if you go to Togo, what percentage of the population speaks French? Perhaps only 2%. Yet you are being described as French-speaking. Because your political elite and business elite speak French, therefore you are French-speaking. You come to Kenya, we are clustered as Anglophone speaking Africa. What percentage of Kenyans can engage in any serious discussion in the English language? Not more than 20%. Yet we are English speaking. You go to former Portuguese colonies, we are told those are Lusophone countries. and perhaps no more than 1% can speak in Portuguese. Africans must begin to redefine themselves. You must not allow others to define you. I was listening as I conclude to the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, as he delivered his speech at the UN in New York. And he said a number of things which I find to be very useful in terms of describing Israel. And he said in 1948, when David Ben-Gurion and others established the state of Israel, they inherited a piece of earth, most of which was a desert. They inherited a piece of earth which had problem with water. They inherited a piece of earth which many obituary writers said was dead on arrival. But through resolve and determination to create something that was viable, he continued to say, not in so many words, but in effect he said, today we have the best security agency in the world. He continues to say, today we are one of the leading exporters of technology in the world. The world looks to us for security technology. Today we support many nations with our knowledge in agriculture. Today we are perhaps the strongest country in the Middle Eastern region. They knew what they wanted and they have worked at it consistently. 1948 is the year of the birth of the state of Israel as we know it today. Today, Israel is an economy that creates opportunities for young men and women in the face of challenges and difficulties. Compare that with an African country called Liberia, founded in 1860, with literacy that is not more than 60%, with electricity penetration of only 5%, with a per capita income not worth talking about. In other words, opportunities are there, but you must work at them. You cannot get that which requires effort without making effort. There are no abracadabra moments in economics. You've got to work at it. Africans never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So as you live here, as you go to your different countries, ask yourself, what can I do? The opportunities are there for all of us to see almost in every sector. You choose and look at their opportunities. Challenges will always be there. There will be difficult challenges. When I look at Africa Agenda 63, I look forward to the day that we'll no longer have tariff and non-tariff barriers. I look forward to the day that when you, the Togolese or the Guineans or the Liberians, come to this country, you will not have somebody asking you at a border point, why have you come here? For how many days have you come here in Africa? I look forward to the day when you will not come here with your CFA franc, which then acquires no value, and you meet a shilling that you cannot understand. I look forward to the day that you will have a single currency from Dakar in Senegal to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. I look forward to that. And it is your generation that can begin to do something about it. Already these ideas are beginning to germinate. In Kigali, in Rwanda, early this year, they came up with something called the Afro Passport. I hope that it will not remain, because one of the things that happens is that Africa is a graveyard of ideas that are mooted and never move. I hope that in the next 5 years, the Afro Passport will be a passport that will be used by the market woman in Conakry in Guinea and the market woman in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and there'll be no border barriers, so that there is movement of labor. You know, I was saying that if I was the head of an African state, and I looked at the situation in South Sudan, and in Zimbabwe, I would have requested my colleagues to hold an extraordinary meeting of the African Union to look at how to salvage those countries and to tell Zimbabwe, don't go out to the West to beg. Each one of us is going to contribute 1% of our GDP to support your economy, and we are going to bring you African experts. We are going to do that in South Sudan. Instead, we allow Zimbabwe to collapse. Instead, we are allowing Sudan to collapse. Instead, we are allowing the French to have the final say on what happens in our former colonies. Instead, we are surrendering back to where we came from. Your generation must remember, as Kwame Nkrumah said in 1963, if we do not unite, we will be recolonized again. And this time, the recolonization will be the most pervasive and the most pernicious kind. And it's never lost on me that last year, there was a restaurant of Chinese here in Nairobi where Africans were not allowed. In the 21st century, those are the signs of the times. Is it not Christ who used to say that when you see all the clouds gathering, are these not the signs of the times? What else must you be told? You walk our roads today and the vehicles that you see are photon. However, the Chinization of Africa is something that we must fear. We can trade with them, but it always started with trade. And then it metamorphosed into something else. Let us not go on and on. There are opportunities. Go into your countries. You will not solve all your country's problems. You will not in your lifetime. Your joy is to go and find your own little area of and sphere of operation and try to do the changes that you can. Try to spread the gospel so that in the fullness of time, something will germinate. And I want to conclude by simply giving you what is very Christian. And there are others who are theologians here, so I make mistakes, then correct them after I've gone. But I want to imagine to myself, after the crucifixion of Christ, I just want to imagine what happened to the disciples. They must have said, and they said, not in so many words, that this was a failed project. They went back to their ordinary business. Because the Christ they expected was an all-conquering Christ with the armor and all. But then there was a resurrection. And then there was the journey to Emmaus. And things changed. A bunch of individuals, a number of them were semi-illiterates, acquired a courage that was completely unfathomable, and were walking in that little land in Galilee and questioning the Roman Empire and sacrificing their lives. And a few of them who were persecutors of them turned around and said, we are now supporting you. And 2,000 years later, that project is alive and well and successful. So if you ask those who are in the first century what is happening now, they could not have imagined. So history books will vindicate some of the work that we are speaking today. We may not see the growth of Africa in its splendor. In fact, we will not see the growth of Africa in its splendor in our time. But it will be remembered that the All-African Conference of Churches convened here in Nairobi, young people, so that this is a kind of your day of the Pentecost. Whether the things will descend from heaven, I do not know. But God is no longer as dramatic in his engagement with us as he was in the early days. He is in a very subtle way. So there is a sense in which if you take this as your kind of the day of the Pentecost, go out there and speak in tongues. Not in the manner that they did in the first century, But speaking in tongues means that you intervene in a proper way in order to change people's lives. Knowing as you do that there will be opportunities, and they will be there. If you look at those people like Paul, there was this thorn that Paul says was never removed. And all of them were persecuted. Those are challenges, but in the challenges there were opportunities. In fact, I want to conclude by saying that opportunities are hidden in the womb of challenges. It is our duty to midwife them, that they may be born